My name is Jacob, and I live on a peaceful stretch of land that has been in my family for generations. My home sits on a large property that borders a wooded area and a few other neighbors. We keep to ourselves, mostly enjoying the quiet life that comes with rural living. It was peaceful, that is, until Karen moved in. She bought the house behind mine about 8 months ago, and right away, she made herself known the first day she arrived. She knocked on my door, not to introduce herself politely, but to demand that I trim my tree branches that slightly hung over her property line. I did it to avoid problems, even though those branches never caused her any harm. Karen always seemed to be watching, always peeking over the fence, always complaining about something. She told the neighbor across the street that our property was too messy, even though we keep our lawn trimmed and our driveway clean. She accused another neighbor of parking too close to her mailbox, even though the road is public and not under her control. Things escalated when Karen decided that walking around the block to get to the main road was too much for her, so instead she began cutting through my backyard without permission. At first I thought maybe it was a one-time thing, maybe she was in a hurry, maybe it was an emergency, but then it became a routine every morning and evening. She would walk through my property, uninvited, like she owned the place. I tried to be civil. I approached her and told her politely, "Please do not walk through my yard. This is private property." But she just scoffed and said it is the quickest way to the road. I do not see the big deal. I even offered to help her find an easier way around, but she ignored me and kept doing it. So I decided to put up a fence, a tall wooden privacy fence that clearly marked my boundary and gave us back our space. It cost me a few $1,000s, but it was worth it for peace and privacy. Karen was not happy the day the fence went up. She marched over and pounded on my door, demanding I take it down. She claimed I was blocking her shortcut, that she had a right to walk there because she had been doing it for weeks. I reminded her that it was my property and that she was trespassing, and she screamed at me, called me names, told me I was a terrible neighbor. A few days later, I came home to find a section of the fence completely destroyed, boards broken, the gate ripped off hinges. It looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it, and I knew exactly who did it. I checked my security cameras, and sure enough, there she was in broad daylight, smashing the fence with a hammer, then walking through like nothing had happened. I reported it to the police, showed them the footage. They were shocked at how bold she was. They said they would investigate, and I pressed charges for destruction of property. But Karen was smug, confident that nothing would happen. She even left a note on my porch that said, "You cannot stop me." That is when I got the idea to buy the land between our properties. You see, the stretch she always walked across did not fully belong to either of us. It was an unclaimed strip of boundary land that no one had maintained for years, so I looked into the legal side, and it turned out I could purchase it from the county for a small fee within a few weeks. I legally owned the land that Karen had been using as her personal shortcut. I installed another fence right on the new boundary, this time with a locked gate and security signs and cameras pointing directly at the path. The next morning, Karen tried her usual shortcut and walked straight into the new fence. She was trapped between the two fences with no way out. She screamed, pounded on the wood, and finally had to backtrack the entire way. Embarrassed and furious, she called the police, claiming I had locked her in. But when the officers arrived and saw the paperwork and footage, they told her plainly, "He owns the land. You destroyed his property, and now you are trespassing again." They warned her that if she tried anything else, she would be arrested. Karen was stunned. She had no idea I could do that. She assumed I was just a passive neighbor who would roll over and let her have her way, but she underestimated how far I would go to protect my home. After that day, Karen never walked through my yard again. She would glare from her window and once even flipped me off from her driveway, but she never touched the fence again. The charges for the damage were still pending, and she eventually had to pay for the repairs as part of the settlement. The neighborhood got quieter after that, and honestly, everyone thanked me for standing up to her. They were tired of her entitlement, tired of her bossy attitude, and were glad someone finally put her in her place. But the story does not end there. Few weeks after the fencing incident, I noticed a for sale sign on her front lawn. Karen was moving out. Apparently, the pressure from the neighbors and the legal trouble made her realize that maybe she was not as welcome here as she thought, and just like that she was gone. A new family moved in, a young couple with kids, and they introduced themselves the first week, brought cookies, and asked about the best schools in the area. They respected our boundaries and even offered to help paint the community mailbox. It was like a breath of fresh air after a storm. Looking back, it still amazes me how one person could bring so much chaos just because they thought they were entitled to someone else's land. But it also reminded me that you do not have to put up with it. That sometimes the best way to deal with a Karen is not to argue or fight, but to use the law and patience and strategy. I still walk by that part of the yard, sometimes looking at the boundary. I now own. The fence stands tall, a symbol of what it means to stand up for what is right. And every time I see it, I smile knowing that I did not let someone walk all over me, because in the end, respecting boundaries is not just about fences. It is about respect, about knowing where your rights end and someone else's begin. And Karen, well, she learned that lesson the hard way. Would you like 4 image prompts for this story? Thumbnail prompt, viral YouTube title, variations, description, and tags. Let me know, and I'll send all in one prompt. You said. Full story. ChatGPT said. Updated saved memory. Here is the full 10. 0-word YouTube voiceover script based on your title. Karen destroyed my fence for a shortcut. I bought the boundary and locked her in, written in clear narration style without punctuation. Like dots, commas, or special characters, perfect for long format storytelling. My name is Jacob, and I live on a peaceful stretch of land passed down through 3 generations of my family. My grandparents built the original house with their bare hands, and each generation added something new. My father built the barn, I added the back deck, and someday I hope my kids will add something of their own. My house sits on about 2 acres of land, surrounded by a forested area on one side and a quiet street on the other. We do not get a lot of traffic here, just the occasional jogger or dog walker. Most of the neighbors have lived here for years, and we all get along just fine. We help each other mow lawns, repair fences, and share firewood during the winter. But then she moved in. Karen, she bought the property behind mine about 8 months ago, and from day one, it was like a tornado had blown in. She had that look, you know, the one, the haircut, the sunglasses, the permanently angry expression, the type who thinks rules are for everyone but her. The first time I met her, she was on my doorstep complaining that my oak tree was dropping too many leaves on her lawn. Never mind the fact that trees do that in the fall, or that her property had no trees, so the leaves came from somewhere, obviously mine. She demanded I trim it down immediately. I smiled politely and said I would take a look, and she stormed off, muttering something about lazy neighbors. From there, things only got worse. Karen had a habit of inserting herself into everything. She complained about the kids 2 houses down playing basketball too loudly during the afternoon. She scolded a neighbor for using a lawnmower on a Sunday morning. She even accused the local mailman of stealing her packages and reported him to the postal service. But the real trouble began when she discovered the shortcut, you see, to get from her house to the main road. Karen had to walk around the block, which takes about 5 minutes if you are taking your time. But Karen did not have time, apparently, so instead she began cutting through my backyard, slipping through the small space between 2 hedges and walking straight across my grass, down the hill, and onto the next street. The first time I saw her do it, I thought maybe it was an emergency, she was in a hurry, or maybe she got lost. I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, but then it happened again and again. Every morning around 8 and every evening around 6, Karen would stroll through my yard as if she owned the place, sometimes with groceries, sometimes talking on the phone, sometimes walking her dog. She never asked, never apologized, never even looked up at my house. I tried to catch her once, opened the back door, and called out, "Hey, excuse me, this is private property," but she just waved her hand dismissively and kept walking like I was the one being rude. That is when I decided to put up a fence. I spent a week measuring, planning, digging, and finally installed a 6-foot wooden privacy fence that stretched across the back edge of my property. It was not fancy, but it was solid and clear, a clear message saying no trespassing. The morning after I finished it, I stood on the porch with my coffee and watched as Karen approached the usual spot, saw the fence, and stopped. She stared at it like it had offended her personally, then turned and stomped back to her house. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I came home from work and found the fence smashed. The middle section was in pieces, boards split, nails pulled, the gate ripped off its hinges. I felt like someone had driven a truck through it, but when I checked the security camera footage, it was worse. Karen had done it herself, broad daylight, wearing gloves and swinging a hammer like she was in a demolition derby. She bashed the boards down one by one, stepped through the wreckage, and continued her shortcut like nothing had happened. I was furious. I called the police, filed a report, and gave them the footage. They said they would follow up, and I pressed charges for destruction of property. I thought surely this would teach her a lesson, but Karen did not seem fazed at all. She left a handwritten note on my porch that said, "You cannot stop me," in big bold letters, and kept right on walking through the gap in the fence like it was her personal path. I knew I needed a better solution. That is what I got the idea to buy the boundary. There was a narrow strip of land between our properties, maybe 15 feet wide and 100 feet long. Technically, it was county-owned and not maintained or claimed by either homeowner. It was overgrown with weeds and had no real use, so I did some digging and discovered it was available for private purchase. I called the county land office, filled out the paperwork, and within 6 weeks, I officially owned that piece of land, the very space Karen was using to cut through my property. With the new deed in hand, I went to work building a second fence. This one was metal with concrete footers, a locked gate, and security signs every few feet. I installed new cameras, motion lights, and even a speaker system that could broadcast warnings if triggered. The morning it was finished, I sat on my porch again, coffee in hand, waiting. Sure enough, Karen came out, walked straight to the old path, saw the new fence, and stopped dead. She looked left, looked right, tried the gate, found it locked, and then something amazing happened. She started yelling. She screamed about being trapped, accused me of imprisoning her, shouted that she would sue me for blocking public access, even though it was now legally my land. She eventually turned around and walked all the way back up the hill to her house, huffing and muttering the whole time. 10 minutes later, the police showed up again. Karen had called them, claiming I was unlawfully detaining her on my property. I showed the officers the new deed, the footage of her breaking my old fence, and the dozens of trespassing violations. They looked at her, then at me, then said, "Ma'am, you need to stop walking on this man's property, or you are going to jail." She screamed something about her rights and stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard her porch light fell off the wall. After that, things got quiet. Karen stopped walking through my yard and instead drove her car around the block every time she needed to go somewhere. She stopped yelling at the kids, stopped complaining to the neighbors. She even started keeping her curtains closed like she was embarrassed to face the rest of the street. Then the sign appeared for sale. Karen was moving out. Word spread fast, and the entire neighborhood let out a collective sigh of relief. One neighbor even baked cookies to celebrate. We passed them around with coffee and shared stories about all the nonsense we had dealt with since she moved. A month later, a young couple bought the house. They introduced themselves the first week, asked for advice on local schools, and even offered to help clean up the shared drainage ditch. They waved when they saw us, smiled when we walked by, and respected the fence. It felt like balance had returned. Sometimes I still walk the path where the fence now stands, the once quiet shortcut, now reinforced, guarded, and clear. It reminds me that sometimes doing the right thing takes time and effort, but it is worth. I did not shout. I did not fight. I did not sink to her level. I just used the law, used my patience, and protected what was mine. And now when people ask me about the fence, I smile and say that is not just a fence, that is peace, justice, and the best shortcut blocker in the county. Karen tried to walk all over me. Now she walks somewhere else.